Chapter 21. I will definitely fulfill my promises to you. Stepmother, I've said it before. I'm not going back, so just forget about it, Lin Che said. Through the phone, Han Kaiying could not see her, so at the very least, she did not dare act too aggressively. Her tone of voice brought with it a hint of consolation as she said, Lin Che, stepmother is also doing this for your own good. There is nothing bad about the Cheng family. Although the idiot is dumb, at least his family background is good. If you marry him, you will good days ahead. You'll immediately become the young madam and be able to buy whatever you want, their family won't control you. Your husband is sick and won't be able to control you either. By that time, the Cheng residence will be under your rule. Lin Che snorted. If it's so good, why don't you let Lin Yu marry into the family? It's because they didn't take a fancy to Lin Yu. In her heart, Han Kaiying thought to herself, let Lin Yu marry into that family. In the future, Lin Yu is going to be a proper young madam. How can she marry into that kind of family? Lin Che said coldly, stepmother, I'm not interested in being some young madam. I've already asked someone to retrieve my belongings at home. I will never return to the Lin residence again. Hearing Lin Che be so resolute, Han Kaiying's voice instantly sharpened as she said, Lin Che, do you really want to cut ties with the family? Fine. First, return me all the money I spent on you since you were young. I put so much effort into bringing you up and now that your wings have hardened, you want to leave. Dumbfounded, Lin Che said, fine, putting aside the fact that I waited on all of you like a housekeeper, something I should have received a lot of money for, you have given me a place to live after all. I will slowly repay the money I owe you by earning it. You, Lin Che, what's wrong with you? Do you think I'm unaware of your machinations? The reason you went to Lin Li's production team is because you still want to compete with Lin Li and seize the opportunity to make Qin Qing notice you, right? Stepmother, your imagination is straying way too far. Lin Che could not be bothered to explain herself. Han Kaiying scolded, why don't you look at yourself? Which part of you can even compare to Lin Li's pinky finger? Yet you still hope that Qin Qing will take a fancy to you. If you really don't have such thoughts, then immediately back out from the cast. Lin Che scowled and said, now get this clear. That is my job. I won't listen to you and back out just because you asked me to. You. Lin Che said, also, if you're really so scared that I might snatch Qin Qing from her, then make your daughter look more attractive. What are you threatening me for? When Lin Che finished speaking, she slammed the phone down. She lifted her head only to coincidentally see Gu Jingze behind her. His jet-black irises were like deep waters of the sea, alluring and mysterious. With awkwardness showing plainly on her face, she looked at him and said, why don't you make any sound when you walk? It's basic etiquette to walk quietly. Surely, not everyone should be like you, making unnecessary noises and fussing around. Gu Jingze walked in with his long legs, his posture elegant. Lin Che said in a dismayed tone, yes, yes, yes. You're the most well-mannered person and I'm the most uncultured. Luckily, we'll be getting a divorce sooner or later. Otherwise, I would really go mad if I had to be educated and be looked down upon for the rest of my life. With his hands clasped behind his back, Gu Jingze said, indeed it's true. What? I'm the most well-mannered and you're the most uncultured. It's completely true, Gu Jingze said. You, Lin Che shot a glare at him as she huffed. She then walked forward, imitating the small steps of a lady. Upon seeing this, Gu Jingze's urge to laugh almost broke his facade. Lin Che turned back and said, do you like such a gait? Did I imitate it well? So dumb, he said. With your stupidity, it's no wonder you ended up drugging the wrong person. Hey, didn't we agree not to bring up that matter again? Lin Che said, her face swelling with anger. Gu Jingze looked at her and wanted to say something, but could not help but ask, is the Qin Qing the man you like? The smile on Lin Che's face instantly stiffened greatly. A hint of deep grief flashed in her eyes. Don't you feel awkward at all talking to your wife about the person she likes? No, he said. Lin Che was speechless. Fine, anyway, yes, actually, it's all right for me to tell you since you don't know him anyway. Not everyone is so lucky to have the person they are attracted to like them back as well. He and I can probably be considered childhood sweethearts, but unfortunately, the person he has always liked is Lin Li. When she lifted her head, Lin Che's eyes met Gu Jingze's profound ones. At that moment, she felt as if that sensual gaze could almost penetrate her body. If you want, I can help you get him. Get him? Lin Che looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? It's exactly what it sounds like. If you want, I can make him like you and be together with you. Gu Jingze's rich voice was laced with haughty arrogance. Ha, how can you make him like me? Lin Che said. Gu Jingze said, for instance, I can make him unable to get engaged to your sister. I can impose pressure on him and force him to be with you. Ha, then forget it. She said quickly, why not make him marry Lin Li quickly so that people won't all think that I'm trying to snatch him away? I feel so awkward in that situation. Gu Jingze's brow furrowed. It's not impossible either, but are you sure you want that? I'm already married now. Is it really good for you to be talking to a married woman about this? Looking at his poker face, she hurriedly interrupted him. Gu Jingze said, it doesn't matter. I've said it before, I made this marriage happen, so I can definitely give you any compensation you ask for. Apart from money, I can count this as part of the compensation too. Forget it. Right now, I just feel that I've heard enough of his name. Actually, love is just one part of life. My bigger wish is to act and improve myself, career-wise. In this way, better people will be able to see me. Then, I'll be able to meet much better men. As for Qin Qing, he'll just be a small interlude at most by then. Throughout life, who hasn't met a person he or she loved but could not have, right? I haven't met such a person, Gu Jingze said coolly. Fine, Lin Che thought as she looked at him speechlessly. But she also knew that he was speaking the truth. Lin Che said, all right. I'll go take a shower first. All right, but if you change your mind, you can tell me anytime. Thank you. Lin Che thought to herself that no matter what, he was still trying to help her. Gu Jingze said, it's all right. I'm your husband, it's only right for me to consider your interests. Including helping your wife find her next husband. Gu Jingze, you're really too nice, Lin Che smiled instinctively and said. When Gu Jingze saw her radiant smile, his gaze paused for a bit before it shifted away. That's right, I'll fulfill every promise I make to you. When they just married, he had already said that he would compensate her and he was definitely going to. Lin Che's heart thumped, as he stood there completely upright, saying things like, I'll fulfill every promise I've made to you. She felt that he gave off a deadly sensual feeling. She turned her head away and blinked before smiling faintly. No matter how good he was, he belonged to someone else anyway. She was going to divorce him sooner or later. Chapter 22. You're so stupid. How did you survive until now? Lin Che entered the bathroom and took off her clothes, preparing to shower. The bathroom here was bigger than the living room of her house. Just the hydro massage tub alone seemed big enough to swim in. However, she seldom used the tub since she always felt a little unaccustomed to it. She saw that today, the maid had already filled the tub with water that was still hot with steam rising from it. After thinking about it, she removed her clothes and stepped into the tub carefully. When she immersed herself in the water, sure enough, she felt much more relaxed. Then, she recalled her stepmother's words and then Gu Jingze's. Qin Qing was about to marry Lin Li. She first met Qin Qing in school. He was the captain of the drum corps and she was a drummer. Because of an injury, he brought her back to the Lin residence. With his then thin and weak body, he carried her body that was slightly plump due to baby fat on his back all the way home. When they reached the Lin residence, he was bathed in sweat. The sight tugged at her heartstrings and at the time, she felt that he was the person who treated her the best in this world. At that time, they were still primary school students. He also began receiving frequent playtime invitations from the Lin family after they discovered that he was actually the second young master of the Qin family. Unexpectedly, this was how he met Lin Li. She washed herself in the bath until her entire body was languid to the point of falling asleep. When she stood up, she only felt a sudden dizziness before she fell down into the tub. A splash of water resounded. Gu Jingze heard the noise from outside and quickly ran over. He pulled open the door only to see Lin Che trying hard to crawl out of the tub. Her face was flushed red and was clouded by the fog. She looked extremely unwell. Shocked, Gu Jingze ignored everything else and rushed forward immediately to pull her out. As if she had grasped onto a straw that could save her life, Lin Che wound both her arms around his neck. Her drenched body pressed tightly against his chest and got his clothes considerably wet. In large strides, Gu Jingze carried Lin Che out with a few steps. He placed her on the bed and patted her face. "What happened to you, Lin Che? Wake up." Lin Che gasped for air. Only then did her clouded and dizzy mind begin to gradually recover. Standing before her was Gu Jingze with his brows deeply furrowed and his gaze full of worry. Her heart thumped for no reason when she saw that. "I'm all right, I just feel a little dizzy." She held her hand to her cheek. "What were you doing?" Gu Jingze asked in a confused tone. "It's probably because I've never really taken a bath before. I felt like doing it today, but in the end, I was laying there for too long. I had felt a little dizzy while in the water, but I didn't expect that sense of vertigo when I got up." So that was what had happened. Gu Jingze's worries largely dissipated. It was only when he straightened his body slightly that he noticed. Lin Che was naked. The smooth expanse of her skin was tinged pink due to the warm water bath. Under the circumstances, the lines of her curvaceous body appeared before his eyes even more clearly. Her chest area, in particular, was glistening with water, making it impossible to ignore. Gu Jingze's heart pounded. He felt a surge of heat pass through his brain and in an instant, his lower abdomen followed and began to swell. Forcing himself to look away from her body, he picked up the blanket and covered her with it. Lin Che also realized that something was wrong with her. Her face was presently so red that it seemed like it was about to bleed. She clutched the blanket with a deadly grip and her heart was drumming in her chest. "Have you never had a bath?" Gu Jingze said. "I can't believe you can faint from taking a short bath." Lin Che said, "Of course. You think everyone is like you and born with a silver spoon in their mouths. When I was in the Lin residence, I stayed in the housekeeper's room the whole time. Of course, there was no place for me to take a bath." Gu Jingze looked deep into her eyes. "How do you feel now?" Lin Che glared at him. "Turn around, I'll be putting on clothes." Gu Jingze was compelled to turn around. "I've already seen what I should see." "You," Lin Che's face heated up with anger and her small face began to swell up. Only after she put on her clothes at lightning speed did she feel a slight sense of security. Gu Jingze turned his head back to look at her. Her small face was still dark red and her lips had been soaked until they were even poutier. When she wiped her drenched hair with a towel, several beads of water flowed downwards along her hair and fell onto her white neck. His throat bobbed. Following this, he felt his body temperature increasing slowly. At that moment, his cell phone suddenly started ringing. He lifted his phone and saw Hilling's name displayed on the screen. After letting out a dry cough, he shifted his gaze away from her and picked up the call. "Hilling, what's up?" he asked. When Lin Che heard Hilling, she also turned her head to look at Gu Jingze, who heard Mo Hilling say over the phone, "Jingze, I went back and thought about it. I spoke too impulsively today. Don't be angry." Gu Jingze said, "No, I can understand. I'm not angry." Mo Hilling said carefully, "I got angry only because I love you too much. We've been together for so many years. You understand me best. I lack a sense of security. I get worried knowing that you are together with her. I know that you've always been used to doing things without leaving any middle ground or loopholes for the other person. You were just thinking about the benefits for the both of us. I was too insensible." When he heard Mo Hilling say this, Gu Jingze said, "You weren't, Hilling. From the beginning, I've been the one who hasn't been doing enough. It's because I still haven't done enough. That's also why you don't feel a sense of security. Regardless, no matter what decision you make, I will still support you. You know that I will always be on your side." "Thank you, Hilling," he said. By this time, Lin Che had already cleaned her hair with the towel and was about to get the blowdryer. When she moved her leg, she felt a bit of pain and thought to herself that she must have hurt it due to the earlier fall. She let out a sound of pain and stopped in her tracks. Noticing her small movements, Gu Jingze walked over with a frown. "What happened?" It's nothing. I may have heard it earlier. I'll just get some ointment to rub on it, Lin Che said as she stood up and held onto the table for support. Gu Jingze gazed at her deeply for a long time. When he saw that she still wanted to move, he walked a few steps closer to her and said, "Stop, don't move carelessly." As he said this, he stretched his arm across her waist without hesitation and lifted her in his arms. Ayo! Both her legs left the ground in an instant. As she looked at Gu Jingze's gallant face from this angle, the lines of his face were well defined and his jawline was shockingly attractive. Combined with his deep and profound eyes, his entire figure was ridiculously perfect. Lin Che said, "What are you doing? Stay still and don't move." "How stupid," he said while looking down to glare at her. Lin Che's heart pounded, but knowing that he was helping her, she stayed completely still. She did not dare move a single inch. All she did was raise her head to look at him when he placed her on the single-seater couch. The large bruise on her ankle was extremely obvious. Gu Jingze said, "It's so strange. How did you manage to survive for so many years until now if you can get hurt to this extent from simply taking a bath?" Lin Che said defiantly, "I'm used to living in hard times. I just can't enjoy the life of a young madam, all right?" Gu Jingze looked up and glared at her again. "Then start getting used to it now since you'll have to be a young madam for a few more years." Lin Che's heart heated up again. When she thought about living together with him for a few more years, she just felt that it was a little unbelievable. Chapter 23. I'm your husband. It's only right that I should look after you. Gu Jingze pressed the bell on the side while saying to her, "If you need anything, don't move. Just press this and a maid will come." It was his first time explaining these things to her personally. For the past few days, she had remained oblivious that such things even existed. She looked at the button at the head of the bed and said in awe, "Being rich is just great. You can lie on the bed for a whole day without moving and you still wouldn't die of hunger." Gu Jingze looked at her. "Right now, you're also a rich person." "I'm not at all," Lin Che said. Gu Jingze said, "With a husband as wealthy as me, of course, you're a rich person." When Lin Che heard this, she felt a tingling warmth in her chest. But then again, she remembered that it would only be for a few years, so she pondered a bit before saying, "Forget it. If I really get too accustomed to it, then I won't be able to get used to living a hard life after we divorce." Gu Jingze looked at her in frustration. "You think too much." "Of course." Gu Jingze thought for a bit, looked at her, and said, "Don't worry. I'll give you a large sum of money even after we divorce. I won't let you live a rough life again." Upon hearing this, Lin Che could not help but smile. "We'll see what happens then." For some unknown reason, Gu Jingze was irked by her words. Then, the maid came in. Gu Jingze requested the maid to bring him some ointment. Soon, the ointment was brought over. Just as Lin Che was expressing her thoughts about how life was so convenient for rich people, Gu Jingze had already crouched down and pulled up her leg with one hand. Shocked, Lin Che struggled immediately and said, "There's no need. I'll do it myself." "Don't move." Gu Jingze frowned. He raised his head and glared fiercely at this disobedient woman. Gu Jingze said, "Since you already fell, just stay still." Lin Che could only freeze where she was. She looked on as he took the ointment seriously with his long and slender hands and held her ankle. With his head slightly slanted, he slathered ointment on her ankle. She could not help but feel warmth growing in her chest. A serious man was definitely more handsome. She felt that in his half-crouched position, he simply looked extremely sexy and attractive. She unwittingly smiled and said, "I can do it myself too." "You're not used to being taken care of by other people either." He raised his head. Lin Che said, "Yes, I'm already used to looking after myself." Gu Jingze gazed at her with his deep eyes. "I'm your husband. It's clearly stated in the agreement. Apart from the fact that we shouldn't interfere with each other's love lives, we must live like a typical couple in all other aspects of marriage life." Lin Che smiled as she looked at him. She suddenly felt that there was in fact nothing bad about marrying him. Although his heart belonged to someone else, their days together could still be considered comfortable and memorable. Gu Jingze carefully rubbed the ointment on her. Although she was tall, she was not heavy at all. When he was carrying her earlier, he felt that she was really light and almost weightless. When he looked again at her slim and long legs, he felt even more strongly that she was really thin. Her small feet were dainty and cute, and each toe was very round and full. As his fingers brushed lightly over them, it was as if his heart had also been brushed lightly until it became numb. When Lin Che saw that his movements had slowed, she looked down and asked, "What happened? Is there a problem?" Gu Jingze raised his head. "Oh, no, it's fine now." After shifting his gaze away from her toes, he stood up and walked out carrying the first aid box. Lin Che lowered her head and took a look at her wound. Gu Jingze really did things carefully. Even the ointment was applied beautifully. When Lin Che saw this, she was truly fascinated. Fortunately, there was only a slight bruise on the wound. The next day, she was back to leaping and frisking about. Soon her television drama began filming. That day, Lin Che went to the filming site very early. When she was done putting on her costume, the cast had already arrived one after another. Naturally, Gu Jingze came very late. The moment he entered, a large and noisy crowd of people followed behind him. A small assistant at the side rested her head on her hands as she said in a love-struck tone, "Gu Jingze looks more handsome in person than on television." Yes, his face is much smaller in person and his gaze is more alluring. Lin Che lifted her head and took a look. She thought he was very handsome. The Gu family's genes were definitely good. It was soon Lin Che's turn to go in front and do a dry run first, so she frantically lifted her dress and ran over. Wearing an ancient costume was a little troublesome, especially when this was a drama with a high budget. The tailored costumes were extremely detailed and elaborate. It was very difficult to even walk with the clothes weighing heavily on their bodies. As Lin Che ran over noisily, she stepped on something in a moment of carelessness. "Iya, you stepped on our Farron's dress." Lin Che only realized when she heard someone call out. When she turned around, she saw Mu Farron lifting her dress. She looked at Lin Che and smiled, saying, "It's all right." Lin Che apologized profusely and said, sorry, Sister Farron." Mu Farron looked at Lin Che. "You're the rookie acting as Chen Yian?" Lin Che replied immediately, "Yes, Sister Farron." Mu Farron had a good temper. She patted Lin Che's shoulder and said, "You're really not bad. I look favorably upon you. I'm cheering you on." Having received encouragement, Lin Che looked at Mu Farron with extreme happiness. "Thank you, Sister Farron." Very soon after, Mu Farron left, accompanied by her assistant and staff. The people behind her looked at Lin Che with lingering fear. "Why weren't you a little more careful?" Luckily, Mu Farron is known to be very mature and she has a good temper. Lin Che's impression of her was very good as well. She nodded and said, "Yes, she has a really good temper. No wonder she's so famous. In this industry, you don't just need a nice face. It's also about social skills." Lin Che finished filming her scenes very quickly. Because filming had just started, the cuts she had filmed were in bits and pieces. When she was done, she got herself a chair and found a place to sit and rest. She was a small actress, unlike others who had assistants and managers looking after them. On the other hand, sitting alone was very comfortable. She looked very serious as she read the script and thought about the subsequent plot. Having just finished filming, Gu Jingze turned back to see Lin Che sitting alone. With her head lowered as she read the script, he thought she looked extremely amusing. He gestured for them to stop and told his assistant, "I'm not going to the resting room. Is there space there? Shift the chair over there for me and I'll sit there." The assistant froze before saying hesitantly to Gu Jingze, "Jingze, that's the resting area for small actors." "I'm a small actor too. Do what I tell you to do. Don't spout unnecessary nonsense," Gu Jingze said while already starting to walk over. "Hey, Lin Che," he lowered his head and called her. Lin Che raised her head. When she saw that it was the Gu Jingze, she was shocked and quickly stood up. "Senior Jingze. Hey, don't move, don't move. Sit down, we have scenes together later. I came to rehearse the lines with you." "Oh, okay, Senior Jingze. But do we have scenes together later?" She recalled that their scenes were to be filmed tomorrow. Gu Jingze smiled and nodded. I'm free today, so we're filming one more scene today." Lin Che did not doubt him. She looked at Gu Jingze and picked up her script. Chapter 24. This lass is really very lucky. Lin Che took it seriously and began to earnestly rehearse the script with him. Gu Jingze raised his head now and then to look at her but realized that she did not even spare him a glance and really treated him as if he was invisible. Gu Jingze rested his chin on one hand and began to scrutinize Lin Che in detail. When Lin Che realized that he had stopped, she lifted her head and asked in a perplexed tone, "Senior Jingze, why are you looking at me?" Gu Jingze asked, "Do you think I'm ugly?" Dumbfounded, Lin Che said, "No way." Gu Jingze said, "Then why don't you ever look at me?" Lin Che pointed to her own script. "But I have to look at the script." "So it's true you don't like me. Did I make a bad impression on you?" Gu Jingze thought to himself, was he not as attractive as the script? Taken aback, Lin Che said, "How can it be? I've always liked you very much, Senior Jingze. You're the role model of the industry. I respect you a lot. My respect towards you is literally like a surging river that flows endlessly." Gu Jingze said, "If that's true, then you should start following me and loitering behind me from tomorrow. Serve me tea, get me water, make me porridge, and cook my meals." Lin Che said, "Huh." Gu Jingze said, "Isn't that what you should do?" Lin Che said, "But if I do all of these things, won't your assistant have to step down?" "Haha, so you're doing this out of consideration for other people?" Yes, otherwise, I really would have started following you around. I'm serious, Senior Jingze. Gu Jingze said, "All right, I'll grudgingly believe you." Lin Che hurriedly flashed a patronizing smile. Gu Jingze said, "Enough, you look even uglier than if you were to cry." Lin Che ended up wearing a poker face. She found chatting with him in such a casual manner actually rather comfortable. Gu Jingze was a little different from what the rumors said. He did not seem that difficult to get along with, so she had no why entertainment reports all stated that he did not like talking, did not like contacting people, and was very difficult to get along with in person. From interacting with him, he was actually quite amicable. Gu Jingze only stood up when it was his turn to film again. He specifically told the director that he was free today, so they could film tomorrow's scenes with Lin Che today as well. His scenes with Lin Che had no elements of romance, they were more like camaraderie among brothers. Having rehearsed for quite some time, they were already familiar with their lines and completed filming basically in one take. The director hurriedly complimented Gu Jingze by saying, "Jingze's acting is simply great." He finished filming in one take with no hesitation. Gu Jingze was long used to hearing compliments like these. Nonchalantly, he received the water that his assistant gave to him and took a mouthful of it before saying, "No way. I think Lin Che's acting is very good. There is a lot of chemistry when I work with her. She's not bad." His pair of almond eyes curved as he looked at Lin Che. Beside them, the director froze. Then, he quickly said to Lin Che, yes. It was precisely this quality of hers that we took a fancy to. Although she's a rookie, her acting is really not bad. She has potential." Upon hearing this, Lin Che looked at Gu Jingze gratefully. A little encouragement from someone in her early days as an actress really made her happy for a long time. "Thank you, Senior Jingze. Thank you, Director," she quickly said. Gu Jingze looked at Lin Che, "Why are you calling me Senior Jingze? Just call me Jingze." Lin Che smiled as she looked at Gu Jingze. She felt even more strongly that he was a really good person. On the other hand, the director was behind them reflecting on what had just happened. He looked at her meaningfully and thought that this little lady was extremely lucky. How could it be that the usually unapproachable Gu Jingze was so thoughtful towards her after knowing her for such a short time? When he initially chose her, it was only because he thought that her image was very suitable. She was refreshing to look at and difficult to forget. But he did not expect Gu Jingze to treat her so specially. The moment the filming ended, Gu Jingze called out of the blue and asked Lin Che where she was. Bewildered, Lin Che asked, "What do you want?" Gu Jingze said, "I'm coming to pick you up." Lin Che paused before quickly giving him the address. She did not expect Gu Jingze to send her home. Very soon after, Gu Jingze arrived. Today, he was driving a less flashy black Bentley that looked like it was meant for business. However, the license plate was still showy. The plate number was 12,321. What kind of bad taste was this? Lin Che got into the car and asked, "What made you think of picking me up?" Gu Jingze looked at her. She had just finished her scenes, so she still had makeup on. She looked like a water lotus that was extremely exquisite and beautiful. Looking away, he said, "Oh, the Gu family wants me to bring you back, so I came to pick you up." Lin Che thought, that explains it. But he did not have to explain it so clearly though. Lin Che sat down comfortably and said, "Why do they want me to go back so suddenly? Is it really alright if I go back?" Gu Jingze said, "You'll have to meet them sooner or later. What are you worried about?" Lin Che said, "What if they don't like me?" Gu Jingze looked at her. "They will. They would like anyone as long as it was not Mohilling," Gu Jingze thought. The Gu family mansion was larger than Gu Jingze's place. It looked like a compound of connecting courtyards and it inevitably made her feel immensely stressed. Seemingly picking up on her anxiety, Gu Jingze said to her, "My family members won't eat you up. Just relax." Lin Che said, "It's my first time meeting my in-laws. Of course, I'll be nervous." Gu Jingze smiled. "So you have your nervous moments too. That's rare." Lin Che glared at him. "Of course, I said that I'm very professional. Since I agreed to be your wife, I will definitely fulfill my duties. As for these duties, they also include making your family members like me." Then, she saw the large metal gates inside opening and the butler coming out to welcome them. "Second young master, young madam." The butler respectfully led them in. As she looked at the strict security inside, she suddenly felt much more stressed. After entering the house, the interior design was modern and the marble floors were glowing. Before they had taken even a few steps, an extremely elegant lady walked towards them. "You're Lin Che. We've finally met. Jingze has hidden you away too strictly the past few days. Otherwise, I would have gone over and met you from the start," she said as she grabbed Lin Che's hand passionately. Gu Jingze made introductions from the side. "This is my mother." When Lin Che heard this, she quickly smiled and said, "Mother." Upon hearing this, a smile immediately bloomed on Mu Wanqing's face. Good daughter-in-law. You called me mother. I must give you a red packet too." As she said this, the maid came up to her from the side and handed over a red packet that had been prepared earlier. Lin Che was shocked and felt a little embarrassed. Gu Jingze merely stood there and quietly nodded to her. She could only take it as she thought to herself, this is probably a formality in their family. Thus, she smiled and replied, "Thank you, mother." Okay, come, let me introduce you to everyone." Mu Wanqing pulled Lin Che away and introduced her to an old man with a head of white hair who looked dignified at first glance. She told Lin Che to address him, "Grandfather." Lin Che followed suit and called him grandfather. She also heard Gu Jingze respectfully call him grandfather from the side. Soon after, her hands were stuffed with another stack of red packets. Ji Yushand looked at Lin Che. Although it was their first time meeting, his gaze fixed on her eyes in satisfaction before he nodded and said, "Nice lady, live well with Jingze." Chapter 25. It's mine since I wiped my drool on it. As he said this, Mu Wanqing said again from behind, "Bring young madam downstairs to change her clothes first. Jingze is really not thoughtful. Her clothes are too tight, so how uncomfortable would she be if she wore this at home?" Quickly, the maid respectfully led Lin Che to change her clothes. As Gu Jingze watched her leave, he heard Ji Yushand saying from inside, "This lady is not bad." Gu Jingze said, "Is it because it's not healing that you think she's not bad?" Ji Yushand looked at Gu Jingze. "One look at her and you can tell she's neat and natural. She's a good woman. Compared to that healing of yours, one is heaven and the other is dirt." Mu Wanqing also smiled and said, "Yes, I like this lass from the moment I saw her. Your grandfather has never complimented anyone. If he says she's good, she must be very good." Mu Wanqing's words were indeed true. Ji Yushand was critical towards people. He would not easily give out compliments. It was really rare that Lin Che could make Gu Jingze open his mouth and give her a compliment. Gu Jingze did not expect that Lin Che would so easily gain the affection of his family members. Mu Wanqing simply said, "Since you're here anyway, just stay for the night." Lin Che was shocked. She quickly looked towards Gu Jingze, but did not expect him to say without any hesitation, "Okay." At that moment, Lin Che only felt a string of question marks whizzing across her mind. It was only after Gu Jingze brought Lin Che into his room and Lin Che saw the two doors close that she lifted her head and asked Gu Jingze, "Why do we have to stay here?" Gu Jingze said, "Is there anything inappropriate about staying here?" "Of course. I'm so unused to staying here." Gu Jingze looked at her. "What else can we do? If we tell them that we want to return home, won't it draw a bit of attention to what we're trying so hard to hide?" Lin Che said, "We can. We can say that we're blissful newlyweds and we make too much noise at night, so we're worried about disturbing them." Gu Jingze said, "The room is completely soundproof. There is no such problem." Lin Che was totally speechless. As she looked at him, she thought to herself, that was exactly what she meant. In any case, it would have been better to find any random excuse, but instead, he had replied so solemnly. Lin Che could only glance at him before turning her head to sweep her eyes across the room. Its size could not compare to that of the Gu residence. It was a suite with a bedroom inside. There was a simple study room outside, a big executive chair, and no couch. Lin Che held her forehead gloomily and thought about how they were to sleep for the night. However, Gu Jingze had already removed his jacket. He looked at the bed and said to her, "I'll sleep on the floor tonight. You sleep on the bed." Upon hearing this, Lin Che's heart skipped a beat. She did not expect him to actively suggest sleeping on the floor. It made her a little touched. But she was also embarrassed. "Why don't I sleep on the floor? Anyway, I only need to lay on more blankets." As she said this, she walked to the wardrobe and opened it. She discovered rows of his various clothes hanging inside. She decided that they were very beautiful and looked extremely expensive. However, there was not a single blanket. Good Lord, his family must have done this on purpose. Refusing to believe it, Lin Che said, "I probably can't sleep on the floor. There's only one bed, so why don't we ask someone to send in another set?" "Are you trying to tell them clearly that we sleep on separate beds? Then what do we do now?" Upon seeing her eagerness to keep her distance from him, Gu Jingze could not help but feel slightly irritated. He removed his jacket and threw it directly onto the bed. He said, "I don't care what you do, but I'm going to sleep anyway." Lin Che glanced at him. This person had just said earlier that he would sleep on the floor, but now that he knew that there were no blankets, he was about to fight for the bed. "No, I want to sleep on the bed too. You were the one who insisted on staying here, so think of a way to resolve this." She did not believe that he could not solve these problems. As she said this, she jumped onto the bed directly, burrowed into the blankets, and rolled back and forth once across the bed. Then, she lifted her chin towards him with a look full of defiance. "Right now, the bed is completely covered with my smell, the bacteria on my body, and everything else. Do you still want to sleep here?" While saying this, she even licked her hand and rubbed it all over the blankets as she refused to be outdone. Gu Jingze's face darkened. "Lin Che, what are you doing?" Lin Che lifted her head. "What, you haven't seen how dogs claim their territory? They just piss on it to prove that it's theirs. I'm doing the exact same thing right now. Now, this bed is mine." Gu Jingze pointed to the blanket. "I'm referring to what you were doing just now. Wiping off my drool. Why, do you want some?" "You." Just the thought of how she had wiped her drool on the blanket made Gu Jingze feel uncomfortable. He shot a pointed look at her, turned around, pulled open the door, and walked out. Lin Che immediately started laughing out loud in the room. "You admitted defeat so easily, Gu Jingze. You're not good enough." Feeling proud, she rolled around on the bed. However, she suddenly saw the door opening again and Gu Jingze walked in without hesitation. His gaze fixed on her aggressively and made her feel slightly guilty for a moment. She stepped backward. "Hey, Gu Jingze. What are you doing? I was just kidding earlier," she said quickly. But she watched as Gu Jingze jumped onto the bed directly, pulled Lin Che over, and easily carried her over his shoulder. Gu Jingze's body was extremely strong. He was obviously tall and well-built. When he really took action, his movements were clean and efficient. On his shoulder, Lin Che was struggling recklessly. Gu Jingze, what are you doing? Let go of me. She punched him with her small fists, but they were of no use. The door opened and Lin Che was immediately thrown out of the bedroom and into the small study room outside. As she watched the door close in front of her eyes, Lin Che banged on the door angrily. Gu Jingze, are you a man or not? You're fighting with a woman over a bed. Sorry, I can't tell which part of you is like a woman, Gu Jingze said bluntly. Even angrier, Lin Che felt as if her lungs were about to catch on fire. Yes, I don't behave like a woman. Your healing is the most feminine person there is. Gu Jingze said candidly, that's true. Lin Che felt stifled when she heard this. Then, why don't you go look for her? You can't do that, so you're just going to bully me instead. Hearing her say this, Gu Jingze felt very annoyed. He simply said, you think that if I could, I would still be here now. You. Outside, Lin Che looked at her surroundings. There was only a large executive chair that was impossible for her to sleep on. On the other hand, the high-quality carpet was extremely comfortable. She sat down on it and tested it out. It was very soft too. However, she could not just sleep here like this. Gu Jingze, you really have the heart to make me sleep here. It's so cold here. Inside the room, Gu Jingze's heart softened as well when he heard Lin Che's tone softening. However, when he looked at the bed that she had messed up completely, he was filled with anger again. He walked over and lifted the blanket. Indeed, her scent still lingered on the blanket, but it was slightly refreshing, enough to make his heart flutter. How can there be a husband who treats his own wife like this? Gu Jingze, are you really that cruel? Gu Jingze pulled away the blanket and recalled that she had even spread her drool on it. Subconsciously, he felt even more uncomfortable. He said in her direction, you're tall and strong. Nothing will happen to you, even if you sleep outside for one night. Lin Che truly and completely gave up hope. As she lay there, she thought to herself in disappointment, Gu Jingze, just you wait. Just because he had Mo Healing in his heart, he was so cruel to other women. Chapter 26. Someone's sleeping position is really ugly. Gu Jingze, if you really desire Mo Healing so badly, then elope with her. Venting your anger out on me for no reason. Are you even a man? You don't have the guts to defy your family. Also, you don't have the guts to reveal to Mo Healing that you married me only because of her. You're just a cowardly man, Lin Che scolded him angrily before hearing the door click. It was completely locked. Gu Jingze did not make a single sound the entire time. Lin Che lay there waiting for a long time, but Gu Jingze did not react at all. She hugged her arms as she lay down and could not help but wonder if she had gone too far out of line when speaking to Gu Jingze earlier. To be honest, it was understandable for him to be angry. Because of one mistake that she had made, it changed his initial plans for life. Of course, he was angry. If it was not for her, his family may not have pressured him so and may also not have used Mo Healing to threaten him immediately into a marriage. What happened with Lin Che gave his family hope, which was why the situation thus became so urgent. However, Lin Che was in a very unfortunate situation too. She had merely wanted to cook up a scandal, but instead, she had inexplicably given up her first time. Thinking about it, she still felt gloomy. Lin Che ultimately fell asleep after letting her thoughts run wild, having toiled throughout the day. Alone in the room, Gu Jingze heard the din outside gradually turn silent. However, he lay on his arms, unable to fall asleep. He only opened the door to the bedroom when he wanted to go to the bathroom. Lin Che was curled up into a ball at the entrance and she looked very uncomfortable. Gu Jingze walked over and looked at her silently. After some time, he lowered his head and reached his arms out to lift her up. Lin Che was indeed very light as he carried her in his arms. He still felt as if she was weightless. Her sleeping face was scrunched up and had a tinge of roundness unlike her sharp chin when she was standing. When he looked at her now, she looked more like a baby sleeping sweetly. From time to time, she would stick out her tongue slightly to lick her cherry red lips. He carried her to the bed and looked at her silently before shaking his head and going into the bathroom. When he came out, she was still in deep sleep. He lifted the blanket and burrowed under it, thinking to himself that both of them could put up with this arrangement since it was for just one night. Who knew that during the night, Lin Che did not keep her limbs to herself while sleeping. Just when Gu Jingze finally felt sleepy after his bout with insomnia, a hand suddenly hit his body. He gritted his teeth as he looked down at her slender hand. He pushed her hand aside and flipped his body over, unwilling to bother with her. Finally, after turning drowsy once more, he again felt a leg rest itself over his thigh. Just like that, he alternated between sleep and awakeness for some time. After God knows how long, he gradually fell asleep due to fatigue after seemingly getting used to her attacks. When she woke up in the morning, Lin Che realized with surprise that she was actually on the bed. However, she could not remember how she had gotten there. Could it be that Gu Jingze suddenly discovered his conscience last night and carried her onto the bed? But at this time, Gu Jingze was nowhere to be found in the room. Lin Che quickly ran out, only to see that the entire family was seated and eating breakfast in the dining room. Gu Jingze ate his breakfast blankly, not sparing Lin Che even a glance. Mu Wanqing smiled and called out to Lin Che, "Come and sit down." Lin Che could only glare at Gu Jingze sneakily. This guy, was he not intentionally humiliating her? He did not wake her up even after he woke up, making her become the last person to reach the dining room. Lin Che sat down and said sheepishly, "Sorry, I woke up late." All smiles, Mu Wanqing said, "No worries. You must have been tired yesterday night. Jingze didn't wake you up because he adores you. It would be a wonder if he really did adore her." She looked at Gu Jingze, who was just holding his spoon elegantly. He looked like a dignified Persian cat that was eating, his every movement so meticulous that it made him good-looking. However, he did not look at her at all. Mu Wanqing's words were ambiguous and made Lin Che feel even more embarrassed. She had been tired last night because she had quarreled with Gu Jingze for almost half the night. In the end, not only did she fail to win, but she was also really exhausted both mentally and physically. When Lin Che recalled this, she could not help but glare at Gu Jingze. Gu Jingze caught her gaze this time, turned to her, and rolled his eyes. Mu Wanqing saw their interaction and immediately started smiling. It looked like the two of them interacted quite a lot. When she initially made the two of them marry, she was still worried that their relationship would suffer due to Gu Jingze's overly aloof personality. But now, it looked like they actually got along pretty well. This child, Gu Jingze, was different from his two brothers. He did not like talking and did not like dealing with people either. He was arrogant and overbearing. When she made him interact with a girl, she usually saw no reaction from him at all. It was really surprising that he could interact with Lin Che in such a manner. Mu Wanqing said, "Lin Che, you're really too skinny. Eat more." As she said this, she hurriedly piled food on Lin Che's plate. Lin Che said frantically, "No need, there's no need. I can help myself, mother." "No way, you're really too skinny," Mu Wanqing continued, "now that you're part of the family, we must make you plumper." Lin Che said, "Does being slim not look good?" Mu Wanqing said, "Being slightly plumper looks good too. Why, who dislikes it? Does Jingze dare to give you the cold shoulder for being plump?" Gu Jingze looked at Lin Che. She was indeed a little too skinny. When she placed her arms on the table, the expanse of skin was white and clear, and her arms looked like they would break if someone tried to bend it. "There's nothing for me to dislike," he said. Mu Wanqing said, "See, I told you Jingze wouldn't dislike it." Lin Che looked at Gu Jingze. Of course, he did not dislike it. They were in a fake marriage anyway. It would be fine as long as his hilling did not get fat. So Lin Che curled her lip and said, "Mother, don't listen to him. Men are all the same. Although they say that they'll like you whether or not you're fat, they still like slim women in their hearts." After hearing this, Mu Wanqing paused before laughing out loud. There were waves of laughter at the dining table. As Mu Wanqing looked at Lin Che, she truly started liking her more and more. Her words were amusing and her personality was refreshing. She was not pretentious at all. After eating, Mu Wanqing even gave them a heap of food to take away before reluctantly walking them out of the house. Lin Che walked away from the Gu residence with Gu Jingze. In the car, Lin Che tugged at Gu Jingze and said, "I didn't expect your mother to be such a nice person. Before this, you talked about her as if she was very difficult. You scared me to death." As Gu Jingze looked at her face brimming with happiness, he gazed at her deeply. He was very surprised too. It seemed like everything proceeded smoothly when she came to the Gu residence. He could tell that everyone, whether it was his grandfather or his mother, all liked her very much. However, he still could not help but say, "As long as it's not Mo Hilling, my mother likes everyone else." As expected, Lin Che turned her head to glare at him. She pursed her lips and thought to herself that this man was really a jerk. Lin Che suddenly remembered that she still had many red packets yet to be opened. She decided to take them out and started opening them. When she opened them and took a look, she saw that the thick red packets did not hold money. They held title deeds. Shocked, she flipped open the deeds and was then truly astounded. The red packet that his family had given her was actually a piece of land behind a mountain in B City. The red packet that grandfather had given also did not contain money. It was the ownership of an apartment in the central business district. Lin Che yelled out in surprise. "Good lord, is this a red packet?" Chapter 27. I won't let you die. Gu Jingze merely glanced at her sideways before looking back towards the front indifferently. "A title deed and property deed. Is there a problem? Your family is really too generous," Lin Che said. Gu Jingze said, "As the Gu family's young madam, you deserve it." Lin Che said, "So these are all given to me?" Gu Jingze said, "Of course they are." Lin Che looked at the title and property deeds before raising her head. "They are too valuable, how can I accept them?" Gu Jingze said, "Just take them. They're supposed to be given to the young madam of the Gu family and you are, in fact, the young madam. Thus, you don't have to feel uncomfortable." Lin Che thought that his words made complete sense. While smiling, she looked at the two red packets repeatedly. "It looks like there are some benefits to tolerating your bad temper." Gu Jingze looked at her. "You money grubber." Lin Che was in a good mood. She turned her head and said, "Otherwise, what else is the point of marriage? It's either for love or for money. Obviously, marrying you out of love doesn't make sense. It's only money that would make sense." Gu Jingze shook his head speechlessly. He looked at her smiling until her eyes became slits. Her cheeks also became slightly rounder. They were white but tinged with a little red and she actually looked a little cute. His gaze fixed upon her for some time before he turned his head. However, right at this moment, he saw that his phone was ringing. It was a call from Mo Hilling. However, Gu Jingze subconsciously glanced at Lin Che beside him first. Seeing as she was still scrutinizing the title deed in detail, he picked up the phone. However, his voice was slightly softer than usual. "What's up? Jingze, you promised to celebrate my birthday with me tonight. I called to confirm which restaurant we should go to. What do you want to eat?" "It's your birthday. You decide," he said. "All right, then I'll make a reservation at the Western restaurant we usually go to." "Okay." "Jingze, are you feeling unwell? Why is your voice so soft?" Mo Hilling asked, confused. Once again, Gu Jingze cast a sideways glance at the person beside him. When he saw that she had raised her eyes and looked over, he subconsciously felt a little guilty. However, he said into the phone, "It's nothing. I'm in the car. We'll discuss it again when I get home. Let me know after you make the reservation." "Oh, all right." Mo Hilling hung up the phone. Gu Jingze put his phone away and looked at Lin Che. "What are you looking at?" Naturally, Lin Che had heard that he was having a conversation with Mo Hilling. Pretending to be calm, she shrugged her shoulders and said, "Nothing. Only the two of us are in the car. Who else can I look at besides you?" As she said this, she lowered her head again and started touching the title deeds while looking like an extremely engrossed money grubber. Gu Jingze drew in a deep breath before turning his head away. Lin Che thought to herself, "Forget it. It was a fake marriage from the outset anyway. It's none of my business that he's dating someone else." The money in her hands was still the most reliable. Very soon after, they arrived home. However, the car had just turned around a corner when another car suddenly knocked into it abruptly. Within a mere moment, the car was dented on one side and smoke immediately started rising from the front. Several cars that had been stealthily following behind quickly rushed over. When the car door was opened, everyone saw Gu Jingze and Lin Che hugging together tightly. When that accident occurred, Lin Che did not realize what was happening. It was only when she was laying on his stiff and hard body that her head felt a little clearer. However, the inside of the car was in a complete mess. Gu Jingze's expression was somber and as cold as ice. His eyes seemed to be unfocused before they finally focused on Lin Che's face. She quickly said, "How are you feeling? Gu Jingze, are you all right?" The car had knocked on his side of the car and it scared her to death. However, Gu Jingze just stared at her pale face. Suddenly, he seemed to remember something and lifted her arm in one swift motion. On her thigh, there was an obvious slash and it was impossible to discern what was blood and what was flesh. Gu Jingze's face darkened immediately. "All of you, move aside. Madam is injured." Gu Jingze's voice was unexpectedly a little dull and hoarse. Without waiting for the people outside to react, he had already pulled Lin Che's arms towards him and carried her out from below. In the split second that the accident had happened earlier, it was Lin Che who had flung caution to the winds and threw herself onto him. If not for her, he would have been the one injured this very moment. Lin Che only felt a surge of pain on her body after he lifted her up in his arms. Thereafter, the pain began to intensify. The people outside were shocked. When they saw Gu Jingze carrying Lin Che as he walked out hurriedly, they quickly followed behind him noisily. At the hospital, Lin Che had lost an excessive amount of blood, causing her to feel weak and feeble. She looked at Gu Jingze beside her and felt his hand holding hers. She did not know why, but with the heat of his palm consoling her with its warmth, she seemed to feel that it was not all that painful anymore. However, when she looked down, she saw that his white shirt had been drenched in blood. She could not help but laugh. She looked at his cold face and said, "Gu Jingze, I'm not dying now, right?" Gu Jingze's heart froze. He subconsciously scrunched up his face as well. His chilly gaze rested on Lin Che in a castigating manner, but he did not dare to be too fierce. "What nonsense are you spouting? You're not going to die." "But I lost a lot of blood," I said. "The doctor is treating you. You lost a lot of blood only because a major artery in your thigh was slashed." "Ah, a major artery. It sounds scary. Tell me, if I die, will you be able to free yourself immediately and fly away with your Miss Mo?" Gu Jingze's face darkened. There were turbulent waves in his jet-black irises and his brow furrowed. "Shut up, I won't let you die." When he heard the name, Mo Hilling, he actually felt slightly impatient. The feeling of not wanting to mention her silently surged in his heart. If she had not called, he would not have been constantly distracted and he would have realized the abnormalities outside. Lin Che said, "Really? But it really hurts." Gu Jingze looked at her small face all scrunched up. She was as pale as a sheet of paper and her small and weak lips were shriveled together. Her appearance made his heart seize up. He raised his head. "Didn't you hear that? Madam said that she's in pain. Get the doctor to treat her quickly." Qin Hao had been following him by his side. When he saw an expression of extreme gloominess overcast Gu Jingze's face, he quickly turned around to urge the other people to increase their pace. Gu Jingze's gaze stayed on Lin Che's face. When he saw her turning her head away seemingly to hide her pain, his eyes darkened. He used his large hand to turn her face towards him. As he pinched her delicate chin, his gaze was black. "Look at me, don't overthink." "MK," she hummed, but she still could not bear the pain. Gu Jingze's gaze landed on her lips, which had dried and shriveled from the excessive loss of blood. Her lips were slightly parted, her breathing was heavy, and her brows had converged. He pinched her chin and turned his body to move closer to her before directly blocking her lips, which had been continuously opening and closing. Chapter 28. There's no answer to why I love you. Lin Che felt as if blood had suddenly rushed to her brain, turning it to complete chaos. It was only when his slightly cool lips brushed against hers and left behind a lingering patch of moisture that she regained her senses. He had kissed her. And he was still kissing her. He daringly pried her teeth open and almost raided her of all her air, not giving her any space to think at all. Their tongues knocked against each other and his tongue wrapped around the tip of hers. With one forceful suck, all of her blood seemed to begin flowing backward and a feeling of numbness immediately spread across her entire body. Lin Che's eyes widened. As she looked at his perfect face in such close proximity, a fragrance embraced her. It was tinged with the heat of ambiguity and it caused her to suddenly forget her pain. Her fingers clutched his strong hand as the heat still in his palm traveled into her hand in threads. She did not feel an ounce of pain again until the doctor stitched her wound up. Until Gu Jingze slowly released her lips. Her scent was as sweet as he remembered. After he released her lips, the remnants of desire lingered between his teeth. It might have been the earlier spike in adrenaline that had allowed Lin Che, who had lost an excessive amount of blood, to stay awake all this while. However, when the doctor stood up and said that he was done treating her, she laid down and fainted immediately like a broken string that was released. When Lin Che woke up, she realized that there was an expanse of blue around her. There were various types of apparatus in operation. She froze and struggled to get up only to pull her wound below that left her feeling a stabbing pain. However, she sensed that someone was still holding her hand. It was only then that she saw Gu Jingze laying by the bedside, fast asleep. Her slight movement caused him to open his eyes instantly. What happened? He looked at her with slight anxiousness. Is there anything wrong with you? He looked a little tired. Lin Che could not help but wonder if he had stayed here accompanying her for the entire night. Lin Che quickly said, No, I just pulled on my wound slightly. Upon hearing this, Gu Jingze rushed to stand up and lifted the blanket to check her wound. It was still tightly bandaged and probably would not lead to any complications. He let out a sigh of relief and frowned at her. He said, Be a little more careful. Don't move around for no reason. In the last night, she mumbled from time to time and her groaning made him feel uneasy. He could only hold her hand like this and stay beside her throughout the night. It was only when dawn approached that he succumbed to his tiredness by laying down and falling asleep. Qin Hao could not bear to see him like this and wanted him to sleep in the adjacent hospital room. But each time he moved, Lin Che would grunt a few times. Thus, he lifted his hand and gestured for Qin Hao to leave. He stayed here looking after her the entire night. Fortunately, the doctor said that although a major artery had ruptured, the bleeding had stopped and she was going to heal with timely treatment. However, a large amount of blood flowed from the major artery, so even though the bleeding stopped, there was still an excessive amount of blood loss, which caused her to feel very weak. The doctor also said that it was highly dangerous for the major artery there to bleed. If not for the timely treatment, she would have likely died within a short amount of time. Lin Che felt that she seemed to be in much better spirits as she looked around the luxurious VIP ward. If not for the excessive number of apparatus, it really looked nothing like a ward. She knew that she was probably all right now. At the same time that she heaved a sigh of relief, she suddenly remembered. Oh no, what about my title deed and my property deed? Gu Jingze looked at her, dumbfounded. I don't know. Lin Che was shocked. No way. She had tossed it aside somewhere in her moment of anxiety. How could it be that no one kept it for her? Lin Che said, How could this happen? It's such an important thing. Gu Jingze gazed at her deeply. Fine, if it was really so important, then why didn't you hug your title and property deeds tightly and huddle into a corner? You even tossed them aside and jumped on me. He felt slightly apologetic towards her. He did not expect her to actually react that way. Lin Che blinked. I forgot what happened. Maybe I did it in a moment of impulse. Gu Jingze looked at her. Don't do it again next time. It was too dangerous. Lin Che said, Of course. After being taught a lesson this time, I know what to do next time. It's just because this was my first time and I didn't have experience, so I didn't know where to hide. Gu Jingze shook his head. Lin Che said, Oh right. My property deed and title deed can be recreated. Of course. If your name was on them, then they're yours. That's great. Lin Che seemed to be relieved. Gu Jingze said, Okay, money grubber. Since this problem has been solved, it's time for you to eat something. The doctor said that she could eat when she woke up, so he had already asked someone at home to make something for her in advance. Now that she was awake, he called for someone to bring it over. However, she still wanted to move, so Gu Jingze pressed her down. "I'll feed you, just stay still." Lin Che looked at him with surprise. Gu Jingze had already set down a small table. He picked up the spoon and carefully scooped out a spoonful of porridge. Bringing it to his mouth, he blew on it before bringing it towards Lin Che. Lin Che watched his series of movements. They were smooth from beginning to end and it looked extremely good. She could not help but smile. She opened her mouth and ate it in one bite, but subconsciously bit on the spoon. Gu Jingze furrowed his brow. Looking at her lips, they were slightly redder than they were yesterday with a slight moistness brought out by the rice porridge. His throat bobbed and his brow turned a little more severe. "Oh, sorry," she said vaguely after swallowing the porridge in her mouth without sensing anything different about Gu Jingze. Gu Jingze said, "Can you eat a little more carefully?" Although his tone was impatient, he still reached out his fingers to wipe off the porridge trickling down from the corner of her mouth. His fingers touched her soft and tender lips. A slight feeling of numbness seemed to spread from his fingertips. Right at this moment, his cell phone that he had placed at the side suddenly started ringing. In response, Gu Jingze put down the bowl and looked at his cell phone. It was a call from Mo Hilling. Gu Jingze glanced at Lin Che before picking up his phone and walking out to answer it. Lin Che blanked out. Watching the door close, she thought to herself, there's no need to think to know who is calling. When Gu Jingze answered the call, he heard Mo Hilling's worried voice. "Jingze, why didn't you come yesterday night? You didn't answer any of my calls either." His phone had rung once during the night but at the time, Lin Che was still in a coma. Worried that it would disturb her rest, Gu Jingze immediately instructed Chin how to take the phone out of the ward. Upon hearing the indignance in Mo Hilling's voice, Gu Jingze said, "Something cropped up last night, so I couldn't go." "I don't care what cropped up, Gu Jingze. If it happened on any other day, it would have been fine. However, yesterday was my birthday. How could you make me wait for you for so long alone?" Mo Hilling started to cry again. Gu Jingze knew that Mo Hilling was very prone to crying. However, when he heard her cry at this moment, he could not help but think that Lin Che was actually not such a crybaby. Even though she had been in so much pain yesterday to the point where her teeth were chattering and she thought that she was about to die, she did not even shed a single tear. Gu Jingze said, "Things were really quite urgent yesterday, so I didn't go over. I'm sorry, Hilling. The next time we meet, I'll talk to you about this properly again." "Then will you come to see me tonight?" Mo Hilling's voice weakened. Gu Jingze pondered for a while. "I'm afraid today won't work." Chapter 29. I don't want scars on your body. Mo Hilling's anger was pushed to its peak as she hung up the phone immediately. As Gu Jingze listened to the disengaged tone through his phone, he took a moment to focus. When he saw that the doctor had arrived, he followed him into Lin Che's ward. The doctor had already examined Lin Che's injury. The wound on her thigh was recovering well and she was going to be able to walk again very soon. Gu Jingze watched from the side. Within the time that he went out to answer a call, she had already completely cleaned out the food. Not only that, she had even started a discussion with the doctor about how the room looked so good. She was truly heartless and ungrateful. Gu Jingze looked at the scar on her thigh and said to the doctor, "Can the scar on her thigh be removed?" The doctor rushed to speak to Gu Jingze, respectfully and cautiously, "That depends on the individual's body constitution. Seeing as Madam doesn't usually have any scars, she doesn't seem to be the kind to have scars. It's possible that she will recover, but with a scar this deep, it's likely to leave a bit of a scar." While stitching up the wound, he had especially used a method of stitching that would not leave a scar. But now, the wound still looked jagged. Gu Jingze did not want any scars to be left on her body. As he looked at her wound, he frowned deeply. "I hope there won't be a single scar on my wife's body. Get your best doctor to come up with a solution." When the doctor heard this, his face paled and he quickly nodded repeatedly. When Lin Che saw the doctor leave, she lifted her head to say to Gu Jingze, "It looks like it'll definitely leave a slight scar. But it's alright. If I'm filming I can just cover it up with foundation." But Gu Jingze gazed at her deeply and said, "No. If this hospital can't do it, I'll look for the best doctor on earth to give you the necessary treatment. I will definitely not leave you with a single scar." As Lin Che looked at his somber expression, she felt a slight warmth in her heart. She smiled at him and said, "Why? Will you dislike me for the scars on my body? Seriously, a wife who shares her husband's hardships must never be cast aside. Did you hear that? No matter how ugly I get, you cannot cast me aside." Gu Jingze was speechless for some time. He looked at Lin Che and said, "Relax. I won't cast you aside. I just don't want to see scars on your body." He did not want to see her get hurt, especially because of him. As he looked at Lin Che dressed in a striped hospital gown, he recalled her white, soft and flawless skin. He immediately felt uneasy, realizing that it could become marred by such a large scar, all because of him. Lin Che moved slightly as she said, looking at him, "Or is it because you feel guilty when you look at it?" Gu Jingze glared at her. "What nonsense are you saying?" However, he indeed felt a little guilty. Lin Che said, "If you really feel guilty, then treat me a little better from now on. It's good enough if you don't throw me out for no reason." Gu Jingze froze. He recalled the day when he left her at the entrance. His anger had been triggered only because of her overly foul mouth. From the moment he was born, there had never been a single woman like her who was audacious enough to speak to him like this. But right now, as he gazed deeply at Lin Che, he merely said softly, "Okay." Lin Che raised her head in surprise. As she looked at Gu Jingze, she went into a momentary trance. What did he just say? Gu Jingze shifted his gaze, lowered his head, and properly arranged the medicine that the doctor had given. He then started to pour water for her to take the medicine. On the first day, Lin Che's wound was still hurting slightly, but because the hospital had already used the best medicine on her, she did not feel that terrible. That night, when it was about time, Lin Che felt a little dazed and was about to fall asleep. She looked at Gu Jingze through her narrowed eyes and asked, "What are you going to do tonight?" Gu Jingze said, "You don't need to worry about me. I'll just sit here." Lin Che said, "Why don't you go back and sleep?" "No need. I'll sit here and watch over you." When Gu Jingze thought of leaving her here alone, he just felt that she would be too lonely. After all, she was not like other people who were surrounded by their family members. She only had him as her husband. Lin Che said, "It's really not necessary. Maybe you can go outside and find a place to sleep." Gu Jingze said, "No, there are so many apparatus here at night and you also need someone to watch over you. I'll just stay here." Ah, then, Lin Che was a bit touched. She looked at Gu Jingze and then looked again at her own bed. The bed in the VIP ward was much bigger than the usual bed. She pondered for a bit and decisively patted her own bed. "Why don't you just come up and sleep here? The bed is big enough too." Gu Jingze's gaze flashed stealthily as he looked at the place that she had patted. However, a slight feeling of secret delight flitted by in his heart. As a matter of fact, he did not feel repulsed at all. Seeing as he neither rejected her suggestion nor agreed to it, Lin Che said again, "Why? Are you afraid that I'll jump you? In that case, I'll put the pillow in the middle. The bed is so big. It's completely possible for us to sleep separately." Gu Jingze's brow furrowed slightly. All right, then, we'll do just that. Let's rest early." When she saw that he had really agreed, Lin Che quickly shifted to the side to give him space. Gu Jingze tidied up for a bit before getting onto the bed. They slept on opposite sides with a pillow between them. However, Lin Che had overestimated herself. Although she lay there like this, she kept feeling like she could sense the breathing of the man beside her despite the fact that he seemed to have fallen asleep long ago and was staying completely still. Fortunately, the effect of the medication caused her to finally fall into a deep sleep quickly. Gu Jingze sensed that the person beside him was no longer tossing and turning and her breathing had gradually quieted down. He knew that she was probably already asleep. Heaving a sigh, he flipped to his other side and tried to fall asleep too. However, just when he was about to fall asleep, a leg suddenly landed harshly on his body. Gu Jingze's eyes darkened. This Lin Che, was her thigh not hurting anymore? Her injury did not improve her bad sleeping posture. To not touch her wound, he grabbed her slender thigh and carefully pushed it aside. But then, a soft arm landed on him again. Gu Jingze thought that unless a knife was put between them, nothing else placed there would be able to obstruct this hyperactive woman. He carefully held her arm, turned his head, and gently placed it back. But then, he came face to face with her quiet, asleep face. Her red lips were bright and moist. Right now, it seemed like this hardy woman was already vastly different from the woman who was about to die yesterday. She had rapidly regained her vitality. Then, she arched forward. Gu Jingze paused. He sensed that her lips were already brushing his face. If he moved a little, he would be able to touch her soft, red lips. The moistness of her lips sent a slight shiver through his body and a jolt of electricity seemed to pass through him. Staring at her mouth, he suddenly felt his mouth go dry. However, she once again began to move randomly. Her small lips directly brushed against his lips. A wave of dry heat made Gu Jingze furrow his brow deeply. Lin Che, you're playing with fire. In a threatening tone, he spat out a warning through pursed lips, I dare you to try moving again. However, Lin Che obviously did not hear his hoarse voice at all. Chapter 30. I've gotten used to her poor sleeping posture. Gu Jingze's heart thumped as he looked at her lips. They had a perfect shape and were moist and soft like the wet and red flesh of fruit. However, they also seemed to carry a hint of seduction. He turned his head and gently moved closer. However, just as he inched closer, her pair of big eyes that had been tranquil suddenly opened. His aloof face froze there and then as he looked at Lin Che's glazed eyes. At that moment, she felt that the distance before her eyes was a little ambiguous. In turn, she rubbed her eyes in a daze. The effect of the medication had also robbed her of her rationality. As she looked at his sensual and perky lips before her eyes, she felt her heart itch. Sleep properly. He let out a dry cough and stretched his hand out to cover her eyes. Soon after, her breathing evened out again. On the other hand, Gu Jingze turned his head away and did not glance at the woman beside him again. But when he closed his eyes once again, he could still feel her arm attacking his chest. He frowned, but he seemed to have gradually gotten used to her occasional attacks. He soon went straight to sleep. On the second day, Gu Jingze was already long gone when Lin Che woke up. It was only when she was done washing up that Gu Jingze brought breakfast over. Lin Che's thigh no longer hurt and accordingly, her mood also took a turn for the better. She looked at Gu Jingze and said, just like I told you, it's definitely possible to sleep like we did last night. Look at how much sharper you look. Gu Jingze merely glanced at her silently. He did not talk about how he had found her sprawled across his body when he woke up in the morning and how she had drooled on his neck. Just the thought of that made him feel an itch on his neck. Very soon after, the doctor came to change Lin Che's bandages again. Looking at her wound, it seemed to have gotten much better. However, the scar was still hideous and Gu Jingze continued wearing an unpleasant expression. Doctor, when will my wife's thigh recover completely? The doctor heard Gu Jingze's low voice as he asked this and quickly said, this will need. Before he could respond, Gu Jingze's cell phone started ringing. Gu Jingze took a look. It was Mo Hilling. Still waiting to hear the doctor's response, he rejected the call. Sensing the situation, the doctor continued, this is. But right at that moment, his cell phone started ringing again. Gu Jingze looked at his cell phone a little impatiently. Mo Hilling's name kept flashing on the screen. At the side, Lin Che lifted her head and said, Gu Jingze, pick up the call first and we'll discuss it later. Gu Jingze's face tensed. He glanced at Lin Che before reluctantly turning away and walking out while holding his phone. He picked up the phone, his impatience showing slightly in his voice. Hilling, is something the matter? Mo Hilling pouted playfully through the phone and said, why did you reject my call earlier? Gu Jingze was still mulling over the doctor's words and said into the phone, I was busy just now. Why? Mo Hilling said, you didn't come to celebrate my birthday and after that, you didn't care about me either. Jingze, what exactly is up with you? Gu Jingze recalled the day of her birthday. Because of the car accident that happened that day, he did not meet her and thereafter, he was busy attending to Lin Che's injury. I've just gotten busier recently. Because the accident had not been made publicly known, Gu Jingze did not tell Mo Hiling either. Now that I'm ill, won't you come and visit me too? Mo Hiling whined. You're ill? Gu Jingze asked. Mo Hiling choked back a sob and said, I want you to come and keep me company. I don't care what you're busy with. Jingze, if you don't come to see me, I definitely won't get better. Right now, I feel like I'm about to die soon. Was it actually that severe? To the point that she was about to die? After Gu Jingze returned to the ward, he said to Lin Che, something happened to Hiling. I have to go over and take a look. Lin Che spaced out. She looked at him and nodded her head. Oh, go ahead. There are so many people watching over me here. Nothing will happen anyway. Gu Jingze nodded and glanced at her meaningfully before walking over to her. He reached his hand out to tuck her into the blanket and positioned her exposed leg properly. I'll call someone to look after you. You move too much when you sleep. Make sure not to touch your wound, he said. Lin Che said in surprise, when did I move in my sleep? What happened last night came to Gu Jingze's mind. He snorted to her and said, you say you didn't move when you nearly flew to heaven. In any case, be a little more careful. Don't be so restless. If it starts to bleed again, your leg will be good for nothing. Okay, stop nagging. Quick, go look for Miss Mo. Doesn't she have some urgent matter? After thinking, Gu Jingze agreed with what she had said. He nodded his head and went out. He reached Mo Hiling's house after driving for only half an hour. Mo Hiling's room was like a princess's room. She lay swaddled in her blanket as she listened to the noises outside. When she vaguely heard the sound of a car, she quickly looked at her clothes. Gu Jingze walked in very soon after only to see Mo Hiling lying on the bed with half of her body exposed. Although she said she was ill, there was actually still makeup on her face while she laid in bed. Under the blanket, her silk night clothing covered her only slightly. She cast soft glances at him, ones that were as soft as silk, making her look extremely enchanting. Gu Jingze blanked out. He looked at her as she lay there and softly hummed. She said, Jingze, if you didn't come quickly, you wouldn't have been able to see me anymore. Gu Jingze walked over hurriedly. How did you fall ill when you were completely fine? With the knowledge that he was coming, Mo Hiling had especially gotten someone to tidy up the room. She sprayed on a fresh-smelling perfume and also personally selected a sexy nightgown. Her freshly bathed body carried some tenderness and loveliness with it. She looked at him gently and said grudgingly, I don't know. I only know that on the day you didn't come, I cried the whole night. After that, I couldn't eat anything too. I called numerous doctors to come over, but all of them didn't know what was wrong. I thought I was dying. How was she about to die? Lin Che was the one who almost died. Gu Jingze could not help but think of Lin Che. As he looked at Mo Hiling, he was slightly angry. Hiling, I didn't go to your birthday party that day because something cropped up suddenly on my end. I really could not leave. Furthermore, it was a matter of life and death. I had no time to spare on other matters, which includes this very instance of you suddenly calling for me to come. I really shouldn't have come at all. It's only because you said you're ill. How was she really ill? He felt that Mo Hiling was truly too thoughtless this time. Mo Hiling took a glance. Gu Jingze was actually really angry. In the past, he could never even bear to say a single heavy-handed word to her. She did not feel that this had anything to do with Lin Che either. Her eyes darted around as she figured that the matter he had to deal with must have been a very serious matter, which was why he was this angry. She burst out crying immediately. With tears running down her face, she quickly said to him, Jingze, I had no idea if something had happened to you. I was just too worried about you. I love you too much. That's why I was also very upset. You could have told me if something was up. However, you aren't even aware that I cried the entire night that day. I kept calling your number, but none of my calls got through. He watched as Mo Hiling started crying sadly. Her words were indeed moving and Gu Jingze's heart softened. He lowered his voice and said to her, all right, sorry Hiling. I spoke too severely because I was too anxious. It was I who didn't handle things properly that day and made you worry. Mo Hiling was still crying relentlessly. Gu Jingze could only pat her shoulder. All right, Hilling, I truly apologize. Upon hearing his sincere apology, Mo Hilling thought to herself, as expected, he still could not bear for her to cry. She bit her bottom lip and said wretchedly, as long as you know.